Chapter 12 The Mine. A mile out on the prairie, Kittering and Harkness crossed the trail of the men from the ranch. "Where do you reckon they're going?" Harkness asked. "Looks like they're heading back to the ranch, if you ask me," Kittering replied. "But you can't never tell with those Randys. We better get back to the valley pronto." They trotted out at a good pace over the rolling grass swells until they reached the entrance of the valley, and then, having seen no sign of the other riders, pulled their horses into a walk. "Say, Kittering," Harkness suddenly asked, "how much money have you got?" "About $10. Why?" "Well, I was just thinking that this is liable to turn into some sort of long drawn-out saga, and we better lay in some supplies. I got a few greenbacks, and with what you got, maybe it would be a good idea if I rode into High Springs and bought a lot of stuff. Same time, I could look up that W brand and see who's got the critters registered." Kittering nodded. He drew a folded $10 bill from his pocket and handed it across. "If you wouldn't mind staying in the cabin with Helen and the doctor till we get some food laid in, I'd feel easier about chasing around hunting for Slocum. I'd sure like to find him before the real trouble starts." "You keep talking about the real trouble," Harkness complained, turning his horse down the creek to drink, "as though it ain't happened yet. What are you calculating is gonna happen?" There was no answer, and glancing up, Harkness saw him leaning forward and staring intently into the middle of the creek. "What?" he grunted. "It happened," Kittering said tensely. He pointed to a rock which projected above the water. "You see that rock? How do you reckon it got wet on top?" Harkness spun his horse. His gun had leapt into his hand, and his eyes were darting up the quiet valley. "They doubled back on their trail." "Uh-huh, and then came over the top of the ridge and rode up the creek bed to hide their trail. They're waiting for us right down there at the cabin." A sudden spasm crossed his face. "They got Helen in the dock." "Hold on." Harkness caught his arm. "No sense in committing suicide. We can't ride in there and shoot it out with them. We best use our thinking meat and come up under cover." Kittering snatched at his self-control. For a moment, the first stunning realization had swept him. He was almost submerged in a rush of fury. Helen. In Plug's hands. Every instinct was shouting at him to plunge ahead blindly and fight and kill the whole bunch of them. But he knew, even then, that to get himself killed would scarcely help Helen. They splashed through the stream and climbed the hill into the cover of the trees, and now his brain was racing again, calm, but filled with icy rage that seemed to surge through him with every muscle. He spoke rapidly. "Harkness, listen now and get this straight. I got a camp near here where I figured on staying and watching the valley. We could use that for a base. I'll show you where it is, and then you hightail it to town to load up for grub. You get the lowdown on that brand and get back here pronto. I'll be watching the cabin, and if we get separated any ways, I'll meet you at the camp. Got her?" Harkness glanced up at the sky. "I can't make it back afore dark, but I'll hustle on her," he said. In the rush of events, it seemed entirely natural that they should be working together this way. Kittering had almost forgotten his earlier suspicions, his knowledge that Harkness was a ranger, a manhunter bent on some unknown errand. He knew somehow that the ranger was to be trusted, and for the present that was enough. His business here might be in a direct conflict with Kittering's aims, but they would cross that bridge when they came to it. Meantime, they both recognized a quick, instinctive liking for each other. A trust and a confidence, and an unspoken agreement had sprung up, and to see this struggle through to the end. Kittering had never had any lessons in mental efficiency, but he was on the right track when he decided to leave the ranger business until later and tend to the immediate business first. There wouldn't be much trouble coming in to an understanding with a man who fought on your side with no questions asked and had to save your life as you had saved his. So he took up his watch on the hillside with a mind concentrated on one problem: how to get the lazy Bar X men out of the cabin and how to get through to a relief of Helen and Doc Martin. He tied Patch on the other side of the ridge and scrambled down the hillside on foot, stopping at frequent intervals to peer down through the leaves. There seemed to be no movement down anywhere in the valley, yet he knew, as surely as though he had seen them, Plug and his men were inside the cabin waiting for him. That single trace, water splashed onto a rock that should have been dry, was as convincing as though he had seen direct evidence of seeing them and hearing them. Besides, the absolute absence of any movement below was suspicion in itself. Normally, Doc Martin would be moving around. He might go outside for water or for wood, or for 100 other little tasks that were connected with housekeeping. The fact that he did not appear confirmed Kittering's belief that he was being held, probably at the point of a gun. Searching for a spot from which he could see the cabin directly, he came out into a clearing and found himself before the entrance of the mine. A big cave-like excavation loomed up at the side of the hill, going straight back in under a massive ledge of rock and propped up by rough timbers with the bark still upon them. It was like the entrance to a cave or a tunnel. In front of the excavation was a huge pile of yellow clay, flattened roughly to be level, the raw earth he had seen from the top of the hill in his flight the day before. Kittering stared around curiously. So this was the silver mine, the real prize of this range war. Obviously, Wilding knew about it. But did Bates? He couldn't, or he wouldn't have had given Slocum the valley. Kittering moved forward to the entrance. It was cool and dim inside, and he paused while his eyes expanded to the darkness. Slocum had burrowed under the rock ledge, which had formed a natural roof to the mine, and by taking advantage of the layers of rock, had managed to dig in a considerable distance before it became necessary to blast. What was it Helen had said? That he was just getting ready to blast? Looking around, Kittering found the fuse, a long, grimy cord, almost the color of the earth, fastened lightly to the timbers that were supporting the roof. One end led back into the dark hole of the mine, and the other reached out somewhere onto the hillside. He moved deeper into the tunnel, groping his way from timber to timber, and feeling the rough floor beneath his feet beginning to slope upwards. Behind him, the mouth of the cave was a circle of dazzling sunlight, and ahead was inky darkness. "It's darker than the inside of a black cat," he muttered, reaching for a match. His hand halted halfway to his pocket. Somewhere in that pitchy darkness ahead had come a scraping noise and the tiny rattle of dislodged stones. Someone was in the mine. Without conscious thought, his hand changed direction and flashed to his gun butt, and a voice checked him, a voice that echoed with a hollow booming in the confining place. "Keep your hand away from your gun, Kittering, and bring them up, over your head. That's right, I can see you, and you can't see me. And don't forget it for a minute. Now turn around, walk outside slowly. I'll be right behind you, and I wouldn't make much noise if I was you." Whose voice was that? The booming echoes in the tunnel distorted it beyond recognition, but a clear note of warning sounded in his mind. It told him not to turn his back to the unseen man, whoever it was, not unless he wanted to risk a bullet in his back. He stood poised on his toes, hands in air, straining his eyes vainly into the darkness. "Go on, get moving," the voice boomed. Against his shoulder, Kittering felt the rough bark of its supporting timber. It was a section of a tree trunk, heavy and solid, almost as wide as his entire body. It would leave much of him exposed, but in rapid action, it was a better shield than nothing. He made a movement as though he was about to turn and walk out, and then with the speed of desperation he twisted his body and flung himself behind the timber, in the same motion snatching his gun from the holster. A revolver exploded almost in his face, the bullet screeching past him, while the report, thunderous in the close space, nearly deafened him. But the bright flash, like a stroke of lightning, had outlined a shadowy form crouched on a thin rise of the tunnel, and Kittering's gun blazing wildly in that direction. He missed, he was sure, but close on the reports came a scuffling, sliding sound, as though his assailant, trying to dodge, had slipped and rolled down the incline. Kittering had seized upon the advantage, and he blasted another shot to keep up the confusion, whirled and darted for the mouth of the tunnel. No shots followed him. Charging along past the timbers, he made the entrance and burst into the shun sign, and instantly he turned quickly right and began to climb, hauling himself upward over the ledge by the sheer strength of his arms. The sound of excited voices came from the valley, and glancing back, Kittering caught a glimpse of cowboys streaming up the hill. The next instant, he was clambering over the ledge and found himself just above the face of the mine, in a position where he could be seen without being seen. He threw himself flat, hugging the rock and peering cautiously over. A man burst into the entrance of the tunnel, his gun still smoking in his hand. Kittering drew in his breath sharply. It was the ranch owner, Bates. Bates prowling around in the mine? Bates talking with a broad dialect of a puncher to throw Kittering off when he was discovered? Kittering's head spun. So Bates knew about the silver mine after all. What kind of game was he playing? Matching Wilding against Slocum? What undercut of intrigue? But he had no time for reflection. The drama had began to play out below. Dropping his gun back into the holster after a quick look around, Bates made a dash for the timber. He ran across the mound of excavated earth and collided with Wilding, who burst out of the trees from below. They recognized each other instinctively, but while Bates seemed startled and frightened, Kittering saw Wilding's face flame into sudden blazing anger. "Wilding, what are you doing out here?" Bates gasped, and the foreman's good arm shot out, and he seized Bates by the shirt front. "You low-down lying polecat! You're the bushwhacker that's been sneaking around taking shots at Slocum and trying to make it look like I done her. Can't even play square with me. You took my horse. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Kittering tracked those hoof prints right back to the ranch, and he thinks it was me that done her." Bates tore himself loose. "You're crazy. I don't know what you're talking about." Wilding was suddenly calm, an icy, dangerous calm. "You don't, huh? Well, let me go over a few things that you're so plumb ignorant about. You knew about this mine when you made the deal with me, and that's why you was so almighty careful to leave Box Elder out of the agreement. You had to make me a partner because you didn't want to go to jail, but you figured that if you could hold the mine out, you'd find a way of getting rid of me and Slocum together and grab the whole thing for yourself. You thought I didn't know about the mine. You've been playing from the bottom of the deck right along." "You're crazy," Bates snapped. "I just found the mine today. And if you knew about it, why didn't you tell me? Who's been doing the double dealing here?" His eyes narrowed. "In any case, I'm not obliged to share it with you. I gave you half the ranch, and that was the bargain. This valley and the mine, they belong to Slocum, and if I want to deal with him, I'll do it direct. I told you to stay out of this valley, and I meant it. Now you get out of here." Wilding smiled coolly. "The deal you and me made is dead. I've got brand new ideas, and I'm carrying them out alone. You don't figure into them at all, Bates." The ranch owner glared at the foreman. "Why, you rotten little—" He raised a massive fist over Wilding's head, and then, so suddenly it made Kittering blink, there was a crash, a shot from the trees. A look of agonizing astonishment appeared on Bates' face, and he wilted, quietly and gently, and then slipped to the ground. Plug walked out into the clearing. nonchalantly slipping a fresh shell into the cylinder of his gun. "Don't mention it, boss. Always glad to oblige." The cowboys crowded into the clearing, staring curiously at the body of their employer, and Wilding prodded the body with the toe of his boot. "Throw him in the tunnel plug," he said. Kittering remained still while he heard the scraping and grunting under him, which indicated they were carrying out Wilding's orders. He was beginning to glimpse the deep-seated greed which activated the principles in this struggle, the lack of scruples or loyalty, and the viciousness and cruelty he could expect. Plug, of course, was just simply a killer, and life meant nothing to him. His business was to kill, and he would kill without a qualm. But Wilding was in his way even worse. An intelligent man consumed by ambition, bound by neither scruples nor pity. Not that Kittering had any pity for Bates. He saw now that Bates' protection of Slocum had been merely a blind to throw Wilding off. All the time, Bates had been planning to double-cross both Wilding and Slocum and get the mine for himself. How furious he must have been when Slocum had discovered silver on that bit of cast-off land, that tiny crumb of a huge ranch which the generous Bates had so bountifully bestowed. What was the connection here between Slocum and Bates, which had made the ranch owner give him the box elder in the first place? And what was the hold which Wilding had over Bates? "You had made me a partner because you didn't want to go to jail," Wilding had said. Evidently he knew something about Bates' past which was involved in something criminal. It might be worthwhile to find out just what that was. From this train of thought, Kittering was aroused by the voices below. Wilding was speaking to Plug in the entrance of the mine. "Now there's only Slocum," he said. "Come on, we'll chase over to Needle Butte and get him. I got plans for his daughter." "You forgetting Kittering, aren't you, boss?" "Kittering?" The foreman laughed. "That hillbilly? What's he gonna do when we got Slocum and the girl? He's not worrying me. I'm the owner of the ranch now, and what I say goes. Come on." Their voices faded out through the trees. "We'll leave Curly and Slim to watch the cabin." Kittering came to his feet like an uncoiled spring. His hunch had been right. Slocum was at Needle Butte. The only possible place was the line rider's cabin. Wilding was going off, leaving the valley unguarded except for 2 men. It was his chance to get in and free Helen and the doctor, to hold the cabin again. But wait, he checked himself. If he did that, they'd be no better off. Wilding would still have Helen's father, and with that ace he could force the girl to any terms. He wouldn't have to storm the cabin. He could have her surrender at any time he called for. There was a better way. A long chance, but one worth trying. On patch, he could beat the riders to Needle Butte and set Slocum free and then race them back to the cabin. Then they'd be in a position to put up a real fight. He was burning with the desire to see Helen again, to hear her voice, and to convince himself that she was all right and unharmed. Slocum, he knew from the conversation he had overheard, was uninjured. But Helen, in spite of the fact that Doc Martin was with her, Kittering's emotions pushed him towards the cabin. She was the real reason for his being in this fight, and she was all that mattered to him. His place was with her. But the other way was the better. With barely a moment's hesitation, he moved on quick, running feet over the ridge to the spot where Patch was tethered. End of chapter 12.